Hey guys, this is Patrick Carl Sadamoon. You might know me as the guy with the most IM medals in the world, or something like that. I'm also the CGO of Fnatic, and you're watching Duncan Thorin Shields YouTube channel. Yeah, pleasure being here.
MiBR right now, made in Brazil, sucks. This is the worst lineup they've ever fielded. I don't think that's even really debatable. Even the other lineups would occasionally have like a playoff run, a meaningful performance. This team has been to 3 LAN events. They went to CS Summit 5, this is since they brought in Mayan, the Argentinian player. They finished 6th place, which was last place, and that was not a stacked event. Even the big name Mouse Sports was going without their best player, and indeed didn't even use their in-game leader for 2 maps of the final. Even in finishing last place, their record was appalling. They won 3 maps out of 10 played. They didn't qualify for Katowice online. They went to the Blast Spring Series where they're a partner team and finished last in the group. They didn't win either of the series and they went 1-4 in maps played. They went to DreamHack Open Anaheim, a fucking DreamHack Open where they're by far the biggest name in attendance and didn't even make the playoffs. They finished 5th to 6th in an 8-team field. They lost a best of 1 to Complexity, Jason Lake's Juggernaut. They beat ENCE in a best of 3, but who the fuck can't beat ENCE at this point in time? And then they lost to Complexity yet again, but this time in a best of 3 decider and 2-0 at that. So at this LAN, they went 2-4 in maps. So in total, over these 3 LANs that they've played, they've won 1 out of 4 series, and it was only against ENCE, who is in dire trouble, even worse trouble than MiBR right now, arguably. They went 6-11 in maps, which is a 35% win rate. You look at the squad with the eye test, they quite frankly have no map pool. They don't have a single map that you would say they're top 10 in the world on, quite frankly. They, as a result, have no go-to map, hence why they've even been forced into DOS2 picks, a map that they've been losing every time they play, and why they've been going all over the place. They've even tried nuke picks. That's how desperate they got a map they used to permaban. The firepower of the team, the eye test of the performance, pure shit right now. KNG, in theory one of the most talented players in the team, is the worst rated LAN player for the squad over the last 3 months. People like Mayan, the new guy, are one of the better ones, and even then their stats aren't very good. Fallen actually statistically is the best player in the team right now. You've even more recently seen Taco top fragging on occasion. This team is in really dire straits across the board. Now sure, if you look at this title, you might say, but technically they already have gone international because they got Mayan and he is not from Brazil. Right, yes, but I'm talking about in the more extreme sense. Like, I don't think it's that drastic to bring an Argentinian into a Brazilian team. There's a language overlap between Spanish and Portuguese, even though certainly they're not the same language. There are cultural similarities. Obviously, the countries that even they were birthed by, Spain and Portugal, are right next door to each other in Europe, just as the countries are not too far away from each other in South America. That's not as crazy as having Simple in Team Liquid or Guardian playing with fucking someone Norwegian, etc. Like, these are much more crazy overlaps in that sense. So one of the main reasons why they need to go international is, what alternatives do they have? You've seen the difficulties they've had getting Brazilian talent. When the Furia guys came up, Fallen went out there and he tried to get some of the big names from that team. Couldn't get any of them. Then you go and look, there was even a report that they got turned down from getting a player from Team 1. Most people listening to this video don't even know who Team 1 is unless they're a Brazilian fan. They couldn't even get a player from that team because the buyouts are either way too high or they are literally impossible to negotiate, and in fact they're used as a tool to ensure you can't get the player. So as a result, even though in the past, for those first years as Luminosity Gaming and SK Gaming and even the beginning of MiBR, it was them who were the ones choosing. They would pick who they wanted, who was worthy, who made sense to come into their life. They would turn people down if they didn't think they were good enough. Now they're the desperate ones. Beggars can't be choosers, as the saying goes. So in Brazil, they have to just take whatever they can get. That's why if I were them, I'd go international, because think of even the names that might be possible to secure. They're all names that have already been in this team at certain points in the past under other organisational names. The best player who isn't in MiBR right now, who's Brazilian, aside from Cold Zero, who obviously isn't coming back anytime soon, is Phelps. Oh, you mean the player they tried twice, once in SK Gaming and once in MiBR. And certainly in SK Gaming, they were the best team in the world, but then it fell apart and they didn't want to use them again. In MiBR, not much was different from the period when it had fallen apart. So okay, they can't get him. Henny's an obvious name, right? Certainly not a player I'd necessarily want to pick up, but, you know, a dynamic AWPer, someone who brings some firepower, brings a little bit of fire in the belly, hopefully. But he played with Fallen years ago before he ever made the core of this team. And quite frankly, it doesn't look like Fallen wants him back. It was Lucas, his brother, that Fallen wanted, and then he got him too late, years after the fact, instead of back in, say, 2017. What about Steele, right? Seemed like a solid player in Team Liquid. He's come back to the game again. They've already had him in this team before. They don't seem to want him back. Similarly, they've already tried Lucas. That wasn't the time for it, unless you have a time machine. And Boltz has literally been in the team 2 different times now. And at the end of both of his tenures, particularly the latter one, he was completely scapegoated. It seemed to completely destroy the guy's confidence. Even if he would come back, is that really the solution to bring Boltz in his team? Probably not, right? So one of the reasons why people will say, yeah, but you shouldn't go international is because of what happened last time, right? When they were MiBR and they had Stewie 2K and then eventually they had Stewie 2K and Tarek, 2 NA players. Well, I will say, don't let those 2 players make you think that you cannot have a team that communicates in English. Because, first of all, even though North Americans do speak English, they speak a lot of slang. They don't tend to be the most eloquent. And actually, from having heard the comms when I was at Blast of Team Liquid with Stewie and Evil Geniuses with Tarek, those guys don't have particularly good comms. Like, Tarek actually is someone who didn't talk that much. Stewie talked a lot, but it like as a result, because he's an entry player in a lot of situations, it was messy comms, put it that way. Like, I could easily believe that if instead of North Americans, you had some highly educated or people from countries like the Nordic region, I think you would get a better quality of English, more easy to understand, and they would integrate themselves better into the team in that sense. So I wouldn't let Stewie and Tarek put you off in that regard. The key for me is to keep the number of nationalities limited. Like, I made a video about this as to why I don't think like super multinational squads will succeed. And that's because teams like FaZe and Mouse at times have 5 different nationalities and sometimes drastically different ones. Eastern Europeans with Nordics, with someone from another. That's too many. I'm talking about a multinational team like Brazilians, plus an Argentinian if you want to keep Maya, he's been performing fine, and then a Danish player or a Norwegian player. Don't make it too extreme, make it manageable in that sense, and that way, if the player's good enough, it makes up for the fact that your Brazilian player would be more fluent or would understand the culture better, because obviously, culture clash for me is the bigger issue even than language in many of these teams, especially if you want to play an up-tempo style. So, for me, the issue when you had the NA players is that was a culture clash. They had a different practice mentality, they had different views on competing, and even what Counter-Strike was, which gets along also to the philosophy clash. Because Stewie and Tarek, at their heart, in their best teams, are poggers. They're guys who like to make the game chaotic and play off intuition and make a read in the moment and just attack someone or not attack someone depending on the situation. That's not the style of play that brought the success to this core of MiBR. They had a very much by the numbers, play out the numbers advantages, play out mid-round situations with good communication, and because everyone's on the same page philosophically as to what we want to do, because they were all coached and brought up and tweaked by Fallen and what he wanted to do. That style, first of all, it doesn't work for them at the moment. They don't even have the pieces to make it work. But it also didn't work at all with Stewie and Tarek. They just worked. It just made those players average to below average players, and they didn't fit the squad. But it wasn't necessarily the fault of those players or MiBR. They just didn't understand how to integrate the team together. So if you want players who can do this sort of thing, there are players out there who can play that style. But again, it's not going to be in Brazil. And especially not some amateur or semi-pro from Brazil or South America, because you can't get the big names. So go and look for someone in any country that makes sense in that particular sense. A guy with a lot of nous about them, or seem like they've played a start, they're a good lurker in another team. That would make more sense. In terms of the whole brand issue, because it is called Made in Brazil, right? Well, first of all, you've already got an Argentinian, so you're already willing to break that. You've already had Stewie 2K and Tarek, so you're already willing to break that, right? And quite frankly, when they had Stewie 2K and Tarek, and Yanko was a coach, so 3 out of the 6 team positions were non-Brazilian players, they still seem to have massive support from the Brazilian fans. As long as they're good, that's what will make the Brazilian fans support them. Not the fact that their players happen to be Brazilian. I mean, you see right now, they don't seem to be getting a lot of love from Brazilians right now, and they've got 4 out of 5 players are Brazilian. Their coach is Brazilian. It will still primarily be a Brazilian brand anyway, and the aim should be for it to be that way as it is. Like, you're always going to keep a Fallen or a Fur. You're going to keep the majority of the team Brazilian. You're just going to add in some talent, some super mercenaries from some other countries. Think of Jacob being brought into the 100 Thieves team back when they were Renegades in that particular sense. You want that kind of an injection of skill. So if I was the MiBR guys, I would get, first and foremost, I would target a big name star player who's fluent in English. So I think ideally from a Nordic region, we're talking about a Swede or a Norwegian or a Dane. I would also probably get I think it's a 2-player move for this one. I'd then also get a role player who has good comms and seems to fit your style of play, what you want to do with the team. And then you pick the 3 Brazilians you keep. It's almost certain you keep him Fall. He's probably the IGL. You probably keep him first, assuming he doesn't retire, and maybe you keep in Taco. That depends on what type of team you're getting, right? If you're going to kick Taco, that role player better be really good. And then you've got to figure out how to rehabilitate KNG and find a role for him in this squad. So right now, there's only questions from MiBR. No answers whatsoever and no answers on the horizon. And this lineup isn't going to get it done. Like, I would bet good money this lineup never enters the top 10 of the rankings of HLTV, or mine for that matter. So I think they've got to make a big move like this. They've got to spend, not least because they're in the Flashpoint League. So they're already a team that's in trouble in terms of the rankings. They're not heading in a good direction. They're going to drop out of the top 20, and then they're going to be paying that $100,000 fine every single month. So eventually, it's just going to make sense to either spend over the odds to get a top Brazilian player, ideally a Furia guy, or you're going to have to go international and get some talent into the squad, or players who fit the way you view the game and want to play it right now if you're falling and you want to still go with some of the classic elements of what made MiBR and not a team like an IMT or a Fury, which is much more fast-paced and a lot more variance in how they played. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Chi Mao, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, Peter the Feeder, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly Patreon AMA. Do you want teasers for who the guests are on my upcoming content? Maybe you want to take a part in the Patreon discussion with me each month. Well, if any of these perks tickle your fancy, then put your money where your mouth is by joining the Scrilluminati today in the Patreon link in the description box below.